The courtroom buzzed with a restless energy, like a storm about to break. Spectators shifted in their seats, whispering sharply to one another, their eyes darting between the towering judge's bench and the defiant figure of Karoline Leavitt. She stood at the defendant's table, her posture rigid, her gaze locked on Judge Harold Grayson. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of their mutual contempt. This was no ordinary trial. It was a clash of wills, a public spectacle rooted in a bitter dispute over a contested family estate, one that had spiraled into accusations of fraud and betrayal. Karoline, a sharp-tongued real estate heiress, had been dragged into court by her late father's former business partner, who claimed she'd swindled him out of his share of a multi-million-dollar property empire. The judge, a stern man with a reputation for crushing egos, had made it clear from the start he found Karoline's confidence grating. His voice boomed now, cutting through the murmurs. "Miss Leavitt, your flimsy excuses won't sway this court. You think you can charm your way out of justice? I've seen your kind before, and I'm not impressed." Her lips twitched, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward, her hands gripping the table's edge. "With respect, Judge Grayson, I'm not here to charm anyone. I'm here to tell the truth, something you seem allergic to hearing." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few spectators leaned closer, hungry for the next jab. The judge's face reddened, his eyes narrowing to slits. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already dismissed as a spoiled opportunist. The tension had been building for weeks. The case wasn't just about money. It was personal. Karoline's father had trusted her to protect his legacy, and she'd uncovered documents proving the business partner's shady dealings. She'd brought them to court, expecting a fair hearing, but Judge Grayson seemed determined to bury her evidence. Whispers in legal circles suggested he had ties to the plaintiff, though no one dared say it aloud. Karoline, however, had no such restraint. She'd spent days preparing, her anger simmering, ready to expose every lie. "You dare accuse this court of bias?" Grayson snapped, slamming his gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. "You're treading dangerous ground, young lady. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt." His voice dripped with venom, but Karoline didn't back down. She straightened, her voice cold and steady. "Contempt? I'm not the one. Ignoring evidence to protect a crook. Maybe you should look in the mirror, Your Honor." The room erupted in chaos. Spectators shouted, some cheering, others jeering. Bailiffs stepped forward, unsure whether to intervene. Karoline's lawyer, a nervous man in a rumpled suit, tugged at her arm, hissing for her to stop, but she shook him off. Her eyes never left the judge's, each staring the other down like boxers before a fight. Grayson's jaw clenched so tightly, it seemed his teeth might crack. He leaned over his bench, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're clever, don't you? I'll wipe that smirk off your face by the time this is over." Karoline's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She'd grown up in a world of cutthroat deals and double crosses, and she knew weakness was blood in the water. The judge wanted to break her, to make an example of her for daring to defy him. But she had her own plan, one she'd been crafting, in secret. The documents in her briefcase weren't just evidence, they were a weapon, and she was ready to use them. As the judge barked for order, she caught a glimpse of the plaintiff in the corner, smirking smugly. That fueled her fire even more. The spectators held their breath, sensing the fight was far from over. Karoline's words had lit a fuse, and the explosion was coming. She knew the judge expected her to crumble, to beg for mercy, but she had no intention of playing his game. Her next move would be bold, calculated to turn the tables and expose the truth, no matter the cost. As Grayson raised his gavel again, she prepared to strike, her mind racing with the strategy that could either save her or destroy everything. Karoline's pulse thundered in her ears as she stood her ground, the courtroom's chaos swirling around her like a gathering tempest. The spectators' shouts faded into a dull roar, their faces a blur of anticipation and shock. She could feel the weight of every stare, but her focus remained on Judge Grayson, whose scowl deepened with every passing second. His authority was being challenged, and he loathed it. The gavel hovered in his hand, a threat unspoken, but Karoline wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of silence. "Enough!" Grayson bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip. "Miss Leavitt, you will sit down and respect this court, or I'll have you removed in chains." His words were meant to intimidate, to reduce her to a trembling wreck, but they only steeled her resolve. She tilted her chin, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Remove me? You'd love that, wouldn't you? It'd be easier to bury the truth if I'm not here to speak it." The crowd gasped again, louder this time, some clapping in defiance, others muttering in disapproval. Her lawyer, Mr. Hensley, was practically vibrating with panic beside her. His sweaty palm grabbed her wrist, his whisper urgent. "Karoline, you're making this worse. He'll ruin you." But she yanked her arm free, her eyes flashing with fury. "Ruin me? He's already trying. I'm not letting him or that snake in the corner win." She jerked her head toward the plaintiff, Mr. Roland Tate, whose smug grin faltered for a moment. Tate, a wiry man with a predator's smile, had been her father's partner for decades, only to betray him with forged contracts and stolen profits. The root of their feud was a sprawling estate in upstate New York, a property worth millions that Karoline's father had intended for her to inherit. Tate claimed he'd been promised half, producing documents that Karoline knew were fakes. She'd spent months digging through her father's records, uncovering proof of Tate's fraud, proof she'd presented to the court. But Grayson had dismissed her evidence as inconclusive, his tone dripping with disdain. Now she suspected why. Tate's connections ran deep, and whispers of bribes lingered in the courthouse halls. "You're out of line, Miss Leavitt," Grayson snapped, his face now a shade of purple. "This court will not tolerate your theatrics. Present your so-called evidence, or I'll rule against you right now." His threat hung heavy, but Karoline saw an opening. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder, her movements deliberate. "Oh, I'll present it, Judge, and when I'm done, you'll wish you'd listened the first time." Her voice was icy, each word a challenge. The room quieted, every eye on the folder in her hands. Even Tate shifted uncomfortably, his confidence wavering. Karoline opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, each one meticulously annotated. "These are my father's original contracts," she said, holding up a page for the court to see. "Signed, dated, and notarized. They prove Tate forged his claim to the estate. And here's the kicker. They also show payments from Tate to certain influential people. Care to guess who, Your Honor?" The implication landed like a grenade. Spectators erupted, their voices a mix of outrage and excitement. Grayson's gavel slammed repeatedly, but the noise drowned it out. "Silence!" he roared, his composure fraying. "You will not slander this court with baseless accusations." But Karoline didn't stop. She slapped another document on the table, her voice rising. "Baseless? These bank records don't lie, unlike some people in this room. Tate paid for favors, and I'm betting you know more about it than you're letting on." Tate leaped to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "You lying witch! You'll pay for this," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger. The bailiffs moved toward him, but Karoline didn't flinch. She turned to him, her smile sharp enough to cut. "Pay? Like you paid to steal my father's legacy? Sit down, Roland, you're embarrassing yourself." The crowd roared, some cheering her audacity, others stunned by the escalating war of words. Grayson's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it, Karoline caught a flicker of unease. She'd struck a nerve, and she wasn't done. The documents were her ammunition, and she planned to use every page to dismantle Tate's lies and expose the judge's bias. As the courtroom spiraled into disorder, she prepared her next move, knowing the battle was only beginning. The truth was her weapon, and she was ready to wield it, no matter how fiercely Grayson fought to silence her. A charged silence gripped the courtroom, broken only by the rustle of papers as Karoline held her ground. The spectators sat on edge, their breaths shallow, sensing the fight had reached a boiling point. Judge Grayson's face was a mask of barely contained rage, his knuckles white around the gavel. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Miss Leavitt, you are skating on very thin ice. Accuse me again, and you'll regret it." The threat was clear, but Karoline's resolve burned, brighter than ever. She spread the documents across the table, each page a piece of her father's legacy she'd fought to protect. Her voice was steady, cutting through the tension. "Regret? The only thing I regret is trusting this court to do what's right. These papers don't just expose Tate. They show a trail of money leading to people who should be impartial." She paused, letting the words sink in, her eyes locked on Grayson's. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering furiously, as the weight of her accusations settled over the room. Roland Tate, his face now blotchy with anger, slammed, his fist on his table. "She's lying! Those documents are fake, and she's desperate!" he shouted, his voice cracking. His lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, tried to pull him back, but Tate shoved him away. "You won't ruin me, you spoiled brat!" The venom in his words only fueled Karoline's fire. She turned to him, her tone dripping with scorn. "Desperate? You're the one who forged my father's signature to steal what's mine. These papers prove it, and you're scared because you know it's over." The spectators erupted again, their voices a chaotic mix of support and outrage. A woman in the back row stood shouting, "Let her speak!" while others hissed for silence. The bailiffs moved closer, their hands hovering near their belts, ready to act if the room spiraled. Further, Karoline's lawyer, Mr. Hensley, looked like he might faint, his face pale as he muttered, "Karoline, you're pushing too far." But she ignored him, her focus razor-sharp. She'd come too far to back down now. Grayson pounded his gavel, the sound sharp and commanding. "Order! I will have order!" he roared, but his authority was slipping, and he knew it. His eyes darted to the documents, then back to Karoline, a flicker of doubt betraying his stern facade. "You claim these papers are evidence," he said, his voice tight. "But this court decides what's admissible, not you. I could toss them out right now." His words were a challenge, daring her to push harder, to give him an excuse to crush. Her Karoline's heart raced, but she refused to waver. She picked up a single sheet, holding it high for all to see. "Toss them? Go ahead, Judge, but this bank statement shows Tate's payments to a certain offshore account. Care to explain? Why it matches one tied to a courthouse official?" The room gasped, the accusation landing like a thunderclap. Even Tate froze, his eyes wide, as if realizing the noose was tightening. The spectators leaned forward, hanging on her every word, the air electric with anticipation. "You insolent woman!" Grayson snapped, his composure crumbling. "You think you can walk in here and throw around wild claims? I'll have you barred from this courtroom." His voice shook, but Karoline saw the crack in his armor. She leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "Bar me? You can't hide from the truth, Judge. These documents are going to the press if you don't let me finish. Try explaining that to the public." The threat was bold, a gamble, but she knew she had him cornered. The crowd roared, some cheering her defiance, others shouting at Grayson to stop her. Tate's lawyer scrambled to object, his voice lost in the uproar. Karoline stood tall, her documents a shield against the judge's fury. She'd exposed the rot at the heart of this case, and now she had to press her advantage. Grayson's next move would be critical, and she was ready to counter it. The courtroom felt like a battlefield, and she was prepared to fight to the end, her father's honor and her own future hanging in the balance. As the judge glared at her, she braced for his response, knowing the war was far from won. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with hostility, and the sharp scent of nervous sweat. Spectators gripped their seats, their eyes wide as Karoline Leavitt stood defiant, her documents spread like a battle map before her. Judge Grayson's glare could have burned through steel, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of his bench. Her last words, threatening to take the evidence to the press, had struck a nerve, and the room waited for his retaliation. The silence was suffocating, every breath held in anticipation of the next blow. Grayson's voice, when it came, was a venomous hiss. "You think you can blackmail this court, Miss Leavitt? You're nothing but a spoiled child playing at justice. I'll see you in jail before I let you tarnish my name." His words were meant to crush her, to reassert his dominance, but Karoline's lips curled into a cold smile. She stepped closer to the table, her voice ringing clear. "Jail? You're the one who should be worried about bars, Judge. These documents don't just implicate Tate, they point to you." The accusation was a dagger, and the crowd gasped, their murmurs swelling into a roar. Roland Tate lurched forward, his face twisted with desperation. "She's making it up. It's all lies," he shouted, his voice hoarse. His lawyer grabbed his arm, hissing for him to sit, but Tate's panic was palpable. He pointed at Karoline, spittle flying. "You'll pay for this, you hear me? You'll lose everything." Karoline didn't even glance at him. Her focus stayed on Grayson, whose face had gone from purple to a sickly gray. She held up another document, her tone unrelenting. "This is a letter from my father, written before he died. It names Tate as a thief and warns about corrupt officials. Guess who he was most worried about?" The spectators exploded, their voices a chaotic mix of cheers and jeers. A man in the front row pounded his fist on the railing, shouting, "Read it!" while others called for Grayson to step down. The bailiffs hesitated, glancing at the judge for orders, but Grayson seemed frozen, his authority unraveling. Karoline seized the moment, reading aloud from the letter. "My daughter Karoline must protect our legacy from those who would sell justice for profit. Tate is a liar, and the court is not clean." Each word was a hammer blow, and the room shook with the crowd's reaction. "You dare read that forgery? In my court!" Grayson roared, slamming his gavel so hard it cracked the wood. "I'll have those papers seized and you arrested for contempt." But his voice lacked its earlier force, and Karoline pounced on the weakness. "Seize them? Go ahead. I've got copies, and so do my contacts outside this room. You can't bury the truth, not anymore." Her words were a challenge, her eyes blazing with defiance. The crowd cheered louder, some standing, their support emboldening her further. Tate's composure shattered completely. He lunged toward Karoline's table, shouting, "You're finished! You hear me? Finished!" The bailiffs finally moved, restraining him as he thrashed, his screams echoing. Karoline watched, unflinching, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The only one finished is you, Roland. You and anyone who thought they could silence me." Her words were a promise, and the spectators roared their approval, the room a sea of raised fists and angry faces. Grayson's hands shook as he tried to regain control, his voice strained. "This court will not be turned into a circus. Miss Leavitt, you will cease this performance, or I'll clear the room." But the threat fell flat. The crowd's energy was with Karoline, and she knew it. She gathered her documents, her movements, calm but deliberate, and faced the judge. "Performance? This is justice, something you've forgotten. I'm not stopping until every lie is exposed, starting with yours." The room erupted again, the noise deafening, as Grayson's face betrayed a flicker of fear. Karoline's heart pounded with adrenaline, but she felt alive, unstoppable. She'd turned the tide, and now she had to keep the pressure on. The documents were her proof, her father's voice from beyond the grave, and she would use them to bring down Tate and Grayson both. The judge's next move would be desperate, and she was ready to counter it, her strategy clear. As the courtroom pulsed with raw energy, She prepared to deliver the final blow, knowing the truth was within her grasp. The courtroom pulsed with raw energy, a battlefield where words were weapons, and truth was the prize. Karoline Leavitt stood tall, her documents clutched like a victor's flag, her eyes locked on Judge Grayson. The spectators were a roaring tide, their voices a mix of fury and triumph, feeding her resolve. Grayson's face was a storm of emotions, rage, fear, and something close to defeat. His gavel lay abandoned, his authority shattered by Karoline's relentless assault. The moment had come, and she was ready to end this war. "You've gone too far, Miss Leavitt," Grayson said, his voice a strained rasp. "This court will not bend to your tantrums." But the words sounded hollow, and the crowd sensed it, their jeers drowning him out. Karoline stepped forward, her voice clear and unyielding. "Tantrums? I'm fighting for what's right. Something you've ignored for too long. These documents prove Tate's fraud and your complicity. Deny it all you want. But the truth is, out." She slapped the final page on the table, a bank record linking Tate's payments to an account Grayson couldn't ignore. The room exploded, spectators leaping to their feet, some shouting for justice, others cursing the judge. Roland Tate, restrained by bailiffs, thrashed like a trapped animal, his voice a desperate wail. "She's framing me! It's all fake!" But no one listened. His lies had crumbled, and Karoline's evidence was ironclad. She turned to him, her smile sharp and triumphant. "Fake? You're the fraud, Roland. You betrayed my father, but you won't take me down." Her words silenced him, his shoulders slumping as the fight drained from his body. Grayson tried one last stand, his voice rising. "I'll have this evidence thrown out. You can't prove a thing." But Karoline was ready. She held up her father's letter, her voice ringing with conviction. "This isn't just evidence. It's my father's will. His warning about men like you. The press has it now, Judge. The public will decide who's guilty." The threat landed like a thunderbolt, and Grayson's eyes widened, the reality sinking in. The spectators roared, their support a deafening wave, some chanting her name. A woman in the gallery stood, her voice piercing the chaos. "We believe you, Karoline. Don't stop." The crowd echoed her, their unity a force Grayson couldn't fight. Karoline's lawyer, Mr. Hensley, finally found his courage, standing beside her. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. You must allow it, or this court's integrity is lost." His words, though timid, added weight, and Grayson's face fell. He knew he was cornered, his reputation teetering on the edge of ruin. Karoline seized the moment, her voice soaring. "This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been silenced by greed and power. My father trusted me to protect his legacy, and I won't let him down. Tate's finished, and so is anyone who helped him." She pointed at Grayson, her gaze unwavering. The judge flinched, his hands shaking, and for the first time he had no reply. The crowd's cheers shook the walls, a tidal wave of support that carried her forward. The bailiffs released Tate, who collapsed into his chair, defeated. Grayson sank back, his voice barely a whisper. "This court will review the evidence." It was a surrender, and the room knew it. Spectators embraced, some weeping, others clapping wildly. Karoline stood still, her heart pounding with victory. She'd done it, exposed the lies, honored her father, and reclaimed her future. The documents had been her sword, and she'd wielded them with precision. As the crowd's cheers filled the air, Karoline gathered her papers, her head high. She'd faced down a corrupt judge and a treacherous foe, and she'd won. The spectators surged toward her, offering thanks and praise, but her eyes stayed on the judge's bench, where Grayson sat, a broken man. The truth had prevailed, and she'd made sure it would never be buried again. Her father's legacy was safe, and her victory was complete, a beacon of hope for all who'd witnessed her fight.